All right, perfect. Again, thank you so much for your time today. First off, can you explain to us your role in researching bail reform?
So by training, I'm a criminologist, and as a criminologist, I've been teaching in the sociology department, criminology, for a bunch of years. And in addition to that, I direct a research center at the Institute for Social Research called the Center for Applied Research and Analysis. And within this research center, we've been responsible for looking at jail data for more than 20 years. And as an adjunct to that, we've also had obligations to the courts for looking at court data, law enforcement for looking at law enforcement data. And so we get at this through our work with the county, Bernalillo County, looking at the jail population, and then when they implemented the public safety assessment.
Perfect. Now, I know you've done a lot of research, a lot of different reports, but what specifically has your research found on this topic?
Well, we've been researching it since the public safety assessment was implemented in 2017, and we've conducted a variety of different research projects, but they include validating the public safety assessment in Bernalillo County, which is really just the idea of looking to see if it works well in Bernalillo County. So is it reliable and valid? Does it actually do what it says that it's supposed to do, which is to measure public safety, to assess the risk?
Now, who commissioned this research and why did they commission it?
Well, at the outset, it's commissioned by Bernalillo County, and it's a result of our work with Bernalillo County and the Metropolitan Detention Center, because historically, the Metropolitan Detention Center has been crowded, and what we mean by that typically is overcrowded. So early on, the jail was overcrowded. The jail and the county are looking at ways to improve efficiencies, that is, to reduce the jail population safely. And once they implemented the public safety assessment, the goal was to understand how the public safety assessment impacts public safety and how it impacts criminal justice system in Bernalillo County.
Now, does your research support that the current bail reform system is working?
So our research would support the idea that the public safety assessment is a valid tool, so it actually does what it's intended to do in Bernalillo County, so it measures public safety. And in comparison to other things like bail or other legislative proposals that have been proposed that include this idea of rebuttable presumptions, that it does better than those types of things at predicting risk.
So in what ways is it working specifically?
So when you look at the instrument itself in terms of how it's used, and in Bernalillo County, interestingly, it's only used on felony offenders, so not misdemeanor offenders. In the state of New Mexico and other places, it's used for both misdemeanors and felony offenders at the time they're booked into the jail. And it's used to better understand the risk of that person in terms of if they were released, whether they'd return to court, and their risk for new criminal activity. And the tool actually helps us understand that risk by providing a score, and that information is just provided to the judge as a source of information for the judge in their release decision making.
Are there any ways in which it's not working?
Well, like any other kind of tool like this public safety assessment, it is not perfect, so it's just a tool that uses information to help us understand someone's risk. So there are both false positives and false negatives. So it holds a lot of people who, if they were released, wouldn't have failed to appear or wouldn't have committed new crimes. And then it does release people who go on to either fail to appear or commit new criminal activity, new crimes.
When it comes to people being released on their own recognizance, what does the research tell us?
Well, most people who assess at a low to medium risk can be released pretty safely, and most people, the literature shows us or tells us that most people actually do not fail to appear. So they return to their court hearing, so they appear at court, and they don't commit new criminal activity.
Now, how does that compare to people who were released on bond?
So bond itself and release on your own recognizance are similar, right? So people can be ROR'd, so there is no bond, or historically In the U.S. and up until recently in New Mexico, people would get a bond or a bail that they had to pay. So bond is the process, bail is the cash amount that they had to pay. So the public safety assessment in comparison to bail performs better. So it works better than bail. So bail just secures someone based upon their ability to pay an amount in cash or secure a bond.
Now, people have told us, right, that there's a revolving door in New Mexico, and some people point to the current bail reform system. Does any data support that idea?
So when I think about the revolving door, and I teach about this, I talk about this to others. So when I think about the revolving door, I think people are often referring to this idea that people are cycling in and out of the system, and the revolving door, I think, refers to the jail door. So people are revolving in and out of the jail. More than that, more broadly, people actually revolve in and out of the criminal justice system. So as we know, lots of people who are arrested in New Mexico aren't actually physically arrested. They're cited or they're summoned, so they don't actually go to jail. But there's lots of people who continually are arrested. So when I think about the revolving door, I'm thinking about it referring to that. So we have data that would give us a sense of this revolving door in terms of the number of people who are arrested, and different data that would give a sense of the number of people who are repeatedly booked into the jail. So back in 2016 approximately, as where I work as part of the Institute for Social Research under a previous mayor, we completed a study that looked at 6 years of arrest data. And looking at those 6 years of arrest data, what we end up finding out is that there's a small number of people who are disproportionately arrested. So a small number of people account for lots of arrests in Bernalillo County. So we know that there are a small number of people who were arrested. And then we look at jail data, and we produce reports monthly as well as biannually, so twice a year. And in those reports, we report the number of people who are booked into the jail 2 or more times in a year, and that percent is approximately 40% annually, which means that of everyone booked into the jail, 40% of them, 4 out of 10 of them, are booked 2 or more times in that year. So when I think about the revolving door, that's the revolving door that I think about. But I think oftentimes when I've heard other people speaking about the revolving door, they're specifically pointing to this idea of pretrial detention, and that lots of people are released pretrial who then go on to commit new crimes. And if those people would have been held in detention, they wouldn't have been available in the community to commit new crimes. So when I hear about the revolving door, I think oftentimes people are speaking about that being the revolving door.
But does the data support that?
So the data doesn't really support that, and it makes sense in at least one way that I can think of really quickly. So the one way it doesn't make sense, and I can provide data about this, is that the pre-trial time people are out in the community, that is the time between pre-trial and after their disposition in court, is fairly short. So in that time that people are available in the community for pre-trial, when we look at that, the number of crimes that are committed people who are out pre-trial compared to all arrests in the jurisdiction, being Bernalillo County, it's a really small percent. It's probably somewhere around 4%. So it's not a revolving door in that regard. The people who are committing crimes continually aren't on pretrial release. They're either before they've been arrested or it's after a case has been disposed already.
Now, we've seen that crime's gone up since 2016, and the jail populations have also gone down since 2016. Does the data support any correlation to those two things? So crime has not just gone up since 2016. Crime has fluctuated historically in the U.S. and it's fluctuated here in Albuquerque. And so this is what I teach in the class this is what I teach. So actually, what you would expect there to be a correlation if things occur in tandem. That is, if one thing increases, the other thing increases, or one thing decreases, it decreases. That's not the case here. So the jail population has gone up and crime has gone down, but what we see is that they cross each other. So the jail populations over time have gone up really high and crime has gone down. Currently now jail population is going down, crime has gone up or down. They're not correlated well. So how do those numbers correlate to bail reform, or do they?
So in terms of bail reform, I think that's a challenging question and maybe a little more difficult to think about. So to step back for a moment, I think what people believe that if we put people in jail, crime will go down. And that's not the case. Research doesn't prove that to be the case. We've over-incarcerated people, and we put more people in jail and prison, and we hold them longer than we need to hold them. In terms of bail reform, and specifically the public safety assessment, the idea in bail, or the Eighth Amendment, is to hold people reasonably, or release people with reasonable expectation that they'll return to court for hearings and they won't commit new criminal activity. Bail reform has actually done that. Bail reform has led to the release of more people than were released in the past, so it has reduced jail populations and the length of stay, but it has not led to these large increases in crime or this idea of a revolving door.
Perfect. So that was my next question. Is there any data that shows bail reform correlates to an increase in crime?
There is no data in Bernalillo County that would show that bail reform has led to an increase in crime. I mean, again, I pointed out earlier that we can show that of all crimes for which people are arrested in Bernalillo County, a very small portion of them are because they were out on pretrial release. So what you could do, part of this, in my opinion, is what is the risk that people are willing to take. So if the community is risk aversive and they don't want any risk at all, then you hold everybody and you don't release anybody. And then what you know is that you reduce crime by those people who would commit crimes if they were released. But what you also have to understand is you're going to hold lots of people. And what we read about here, right, we hear about the false negatives. That is, people who are released who go out and commit crime, who we maybe could have held if we would have held everybody. But the problem is we hold lots more people for the benefit of catching the one. So if you're risk aversive, hold everybody. It's a risk that we take.
Is there any data to suggest that it contributes to a decrease?
So there is some data and there's ongoing research. So we're involved with some research of different types that is actually trying to better understand release conditions themselves in pretrial services, and which release conditions and pretrial services, the combination of those things, would lead to further reductions in crime. There's clear evidence in the literature that pretrial detention itself worsens, can lead to more crime because it's holding people who then are losing jobs, don't have connections to their communities, who then get released and they've lost their job, they've lost their family, and they're in a downward spiral. So the Bloomberg, what we did is we looked at 6 years of arrest data. So we got APD data, SO data, state police data, and jail data, and we combined it all up. And looking at that, you can look at all the people who are arrested, and you can look at how many people are arrested multiple times in that given period of time.
Gotcha.
So I guess the one thing that you could say, right, is if the system wanted to be more efficient, so if there is this idea of a revolving door, and if a revolving door generally revolves around the idea that there are a set number of people who are continually committing crimes, then the idea would be to focus on those people. So there's two things that you can do. You can focus on people and you can focus on places, right? Places don't provide us these constitutional issues. Focusing on people provides us constitutional issues, right? So you can't do these stop and frisks because you're focusing on too many people. So if you want to focus on people, you need to focus on people who have large number of arrests. But they have to be high rate offenders committing serious crimes. So we also know that the jail, the only way you can be booked into the jail, say 10 times in a given year, is because you're committing low level offenses. And the cause of that offense is what you need to do. So if someone is getting arrested frequently for minor offenses, it's probably because they have a drug problem, behavioral health problem, something like that, homelessness, things like that. And you have to treat those causes. But if there are people who are high rate serious offenders who keep on picking up felonies, and this is what the study that we did using data from 2016 did for us, is it points to a small subset of felons who are committing felons all the time. You find those people and you prosecute them. And I think that's pretty important because you can do that. We have the data that shows that those people are out there, and we need to efficiently prosecute them, I would suggest that we don't do those things. We don't arrest them, we don't hold them, and then we don't prosecute them to their disposition and then send them to prison. So you'll never take care of the crime issue, right? So New Mexico has disproportionately high rates of crime for any number of reasons. And one of the reasons we thought of is we're at the nexus of two major freeways, I-25 and I-40. So things can we're unique in some ways in that regard. And we've never really thought about that or studied that. But any location where there's high rates of crime, there probably are a small number of folks who are disproportionately committing a large amount of crime. And to focus on those people would at least, I think, help reduce crime by those people. Now, whether they get replaced or not is another matter, but perhaps not.
Now, you've done a lot of studies, right, on the current system. If there was any flaw in it, what have your studies shown?
So a large amount of our work, probably in the last 5 or 6 years, has been with the local Bernalillo County Criminal Justice Coordinating Council. And this is a relatively new phenomenon in New Mexico and across the country. They're happening more often. And the idea is to bring together all the players in this non-adversarial kind of way in which they can meet and strategize and think about the problems and think about solutions to those problems. So a lot of our work has been paid by the county, but driven by the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, which is looking to improve criminal justice system efficiencies. So I think that a lot of our work is geared toward those ideas, and we've made some of those suggestions to the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council.
And what are some of those suggestions?
Well, the Bloomberg data, which we spoke about earlier, clearly points out this idea that there are a few people who disproportionately commit crimes. I think you could focus on those people. There's also places. So if we think about this, we've studied places. A lot of people study places. So, crime is not random. So some places account for a disproportionate share of crime than others. So not all ATMs have crime. Some do, some don't. Not all fast food restaurants do. Some big box stores have more crime than others. And I think thinking about crime prevention at places is a pretty interesting thing. And you can see the city has done some of those things. So for example, the corner of Central and Wyoming I always use for my class when I teach on policing. Used to be this place where lots of people hung out. You could buy the little minis. You can't buy minis anymore. There were places to sit. There were trees. Look at the corner now. Torn down the trees. There's not a lot of places to rest or be comfortable. My guess is calls for service at that location are down. But the city could look at calls for service at places and better think about what those are. I'll tell you something else that's pretty interesting. And I've told this to my class many times, when you need a doctor, you go see a doctor. I don't have many people coming to me as a criminologist and asking me what I think about crime in the county or the city.
And what do you think about crime in the county and city?
I think they should come talk to criminologists who are trained who have studied this. Now, that's not to say that law enforcement don't have all this practical experience and don't have all this knowledge, but it comes from a different place than where mine does. And I think thinking about these things with these other abilities maybe in place might be helpful to think about those things.
So is that the solution then maybe to what people are referring as the revolving door in New Mexico?
Well, again, I don't think there is a solution. I think it'll always be with us, right? Because we can't stop people. If people are determined to commit crimes, they can commit crimes. We can find people who are dangerous, and people that are dangerous to me are people I'm scared of. So they're people committing violent crimes. So people who commit violent crimes, we could target on more specifically, and if we can efficiently target those crimes and then dispose of those cases, we can get them to prison. What this assumes, right? This assumes people are rational. People aren't rational. So if people are really rational actors, you could deter them. Sometimes we just need to incapacitate them.